343. Now, anyone who has any connection to the fire department of New York City in any way knows the significance of that number. And everyone with any connection at all to FDNY has a connection and a story to that number. I'm going to share just one of those stories. Rescue 1 is the elite firehouse in Manhattan, in New York City. It is the firehouse that responds to all the major things. When there's a body in the river, when there are cars that need to be cut apart to save a person, when there's some sort of specialized skill involved, Rescue 1 is the firehouse that goes. They support all the other neighborhood engines in Manhattan, but they are the elite. Paul and I had occasion to visit Rescue 1 this summer. And while we were there on a tour, I noticed in the place where their truck is, there is a whiteboard encased in glass. It has 6 names on it. The people in this elite firehouse who are not merely transferred there, but who apply and have to interview for a spot there, pass it dozens of times a day and before every rescue. On that whiteboard has the names of 6 firefighters. And it says, "Still riding." Those 6 firefighters were the firefighters on duty on the morning of September 11th, 2001, when a call went out that an airplane had flown into World Trade Center. Now, it was just the shift change. So not only did those 6 firefighters go, but another 5 who were just coming on duty also went. All 11 perished that day. Part of the 343 firefighters who died on that day were the immediate after effects of that day. Everyone connected with FDNY has a story and a connection. And every time you meet these folk, for anything more than a hello, how are you, thank you for your service, those stories well up. 17 years later, those stories are as fresh as if they had happened today. Those stones, as it were, are still laid for all the people to see as a memorial forever. It's amazing to me. It's so powerful how these stories have reverberations. Even people who didn't directly know one of these 343 firefighters knows someone who did, or got their job as a result of that happening. This musical, Hamilton, is similarly obsessed with story and legacy and telling diverse stories. It's something that I really love about this musical, and I was not typically a fan of musicals before I encountered this show. But it has, the way that these stories take on life is remarkable to me. In this final song, you heard Eliza sing about the orphanage. She established the first private orphanage in New York City. That orphanage exists today in the form of an organization that continues to work with youth in the foster care system in New York City. That stone that was laid 200 years ago is still there. It is still giving life and stories to people generation after generation after generation. these stories continue to shape our lives and to shape our own histories. And what does it mean of this church, South Haven's church? The stories we could tell. I haven't even been a member very long of this church, just 5 or 6 years at this point. And yet there are 2 stories that I know deeply, deeply true about this community. One of the stories was told to me by Ken Brannick of blessed memory. For those of you who did not know Ken, he was a blessed saint of this church. And when I knew him, he was an older African-American man, always dressed to the nines, always in a suit, always with a cheerful and graceful smile. On my 2nd or 3rd Sunday here, I was pacing in the back of the church with a very restless Meredith. You can see things haven't changed much. I was so anxious. Not a lot of people knew that I was a minister. Most of you all just knew that I was a mom and I had this kid, and we couldn't seem to sit still in church. And Kenneth came up to me as I'm pacing back and forth, and he said, "You know, you're doing just the right thing. You're showing her that church is a loving and wonderful place to be. You were doing a great job, Mama." I don't think he said mama. He was pretty formal, but that was the sense of it. And that was Kenneth. Kenneth told me another time that he had come to this church in the early 1960s at the direction of his pastor, because his pastor was in partnership with our pastor, working to intentionally integrate this congregation in the early 1960s, taking seriously Dr. King's message that we'd not be the most segregated hour in America. That story deeply informed our decision to stay in this church, to say we want to be a part of a congregation that is committed to this work of racial reconciliation. Whether we do it perfectly, whether we do all that we can, I know we have room to grow. But I am grateful for the stone of Ken Brannick's life and testimony as a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ and a member of South Haven United Church of Christ. And the other thing that has kept us at this church, let's be honest, is our ministry of food. This is a church that knows that the call from God is the call to feed the hungry. So we have a hunger center here at the church. We have a senior center where we help feed folk. We run Meals on Wheels out of here. And on Sunday mornings, there's a feast. Every week there's a feast. For those of you watching this after August 8th, if you are ever in the Cleveland area, come to South Haven United Church of Christ. You will be fed spiritually, you will be fed physically, and you will not be sad about that. We are a people who knows that food is in some way deeply intertwined with the gospel. That food is justice, and justice is God's love in action. And that is who and what we are called to be and to do. That is such a gift and such a blessing and such a joy. That is a stone that will lay in my life for decades to come. It will lay in the life of this community of faith as we seek to move forward into the new things that God is calling us to do each and every day. That stone will be right next to Ken Brannick's stone, I think. Because that love, that hospitality, that welcome, that food, it's all mixed up in there. And these will help us tell the story of our congregation, of the ways we are called to embody the body of Christ on earth. One of the things I love so much about Hamilton is its intentionally multiracial cast. And that cast says this: the founding of America belongs not just to the white founders, but to people with brown skin and black skin. This story of the founding of America, it is all our story. And this unabashed claim to that story fills me with such wonder and such hope. Paul and I saw this show on Broadway a couple of years ago with some of the original cast. It was amazing. I will never see George Washington as anything other than a 6'5" black man. I just won't. In fact, the day after we saw that show, we went up to their little home in Harlem, and we were looking at all the exhibits, and I was like, wow, there are a lot of white people in all these pictures. Where's Hamilton? Where's Washington? I mean, it really does have this power to change our narrative. And I am so grateful for that. I am so grateful that children growing up today, my child, your children, your grandchildren, are growing up in a world in which the familiar narratives are being challenged in some really, really remarkable and wonderful ways. Those stones, too, will be laid in the river. But this song, I want to get back to this song, because the song's title is really at the heart, I think, of this musical. Who lives? Who dies? Who tells your story? Well, here's the truth. We all live. We're all living right now. Everyone lives. Who dies? Well, everyone dies. Everyone dies. But who tells your story? George Washington in the musical says, you have no control over who lives, who dies, who tells your story. As a general, he knew deeply that you do not have control in a battle over who lives and who dies. And he also knew that he had very little control over his own legacy. The musical Hamilton comes 200 years after Hamilton was shot in a duel with Aaron Burr. But his story had not previously been told that much until it was told in this extraordinary way. When someone said, we will tell this story, and we will tell it in the most glorious way. So my exhortation to you all today is to say, don't leave it to your enemies or to those opposed to what we're about here at South Haven. This radical welcome, this radical feeding, this deep love. Don't leave it to the people who are opposed to all that to tell our stories. Let us tell our own stories. Let us lay our own stones in the river for those future generations to ask about and to hear the power of who we are and what we are about. Everyone lives. Everyone dies. But we get to tell our story, and we get to tell God's story. And so, my beloved of God, let us go and tell that story with joy and grace and thanksgiving. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.